Hi, I'm Scott. I wanted to do a quick little book review for you. A book I just finished. Um, it's a small book, only 115 pages. It's called Seasons of Waiting by Betsy Childs Howard. She was single for quite a long time in her life and dealt with long season of waiting. And eventually she did get married, but she in this book is reflecting on that. Um, Even by the design, you can tell it's marketed for women, and I think that's certainly very appropriate. Um, it Even though it is marketed for women, there's a lot of things that would be valuable for men in this book, and as perhaps a companion type book could be written for men, as men certainly do struggle with unmet expectations and delayed dreams as well. Perhaps someone could write that book, hitting on those particular dreams and expectations. Right, you think of the phenomenon of the midlife crisis among men, which is a response to unmet expectations, which is evidence of a need for a book of that sort. Um, but nonetheless, this one is written uh, for women and applied to women. So the situations that are that the author walks through are and discusses in the book are fitting uh, for women, as women often do struggle with worry and fear. Struggles often brought on in the waiting for certain expectations and dreams to be realized, and so forth. This book hits a real felt need. Women often find themselves struggling in the in between of waiting, whether that's waiting for something that they eventually, weeks or years into the future, may be realized or maybe not ever. But that in between of waiting for a spouse, a baby, a healthy body, a home, waiting for an unrepentant husband or a prodigal child, things like that. Sometimes these things have no real hope of realization of fulfillment. And so people can relate to that. You can probably relate to that. Our minds can often be then fixated upon those frustrations in those seasons. So, helpful concept for a book. But this is a good book, and so I'd commend it to you. In the preface, she calls all women to seek out other women in other stages of life, um, other godly women who are around you, who are also in seasons of waiting, maybe not the same seasons of waiting that you're in, but for mutual encouragement, for wisdom. And this is good, harkens to the Titus 2 mandate for female discipleship. This book sympathizes with those who are um, waiting acutely, in other words, intense seasons of particular waiting. Those whose seasons of waiting will um, uh, perhaps be with them for a long period of time, many years, if not their entire life. And in chapter one, the author states that the goal of the book is not merely to help people to endure their waiting, but to help people actually enjoy the enjoy the waiting itself as God has designed that season for them and his purposes in it. The book also helpfully distinguishes between godly waiting and a godly longing from sinful discontentment, and that it's possible to grieve and long and wait and be content at the same time in faith. And so she gets into that. Um, Another good thing that I like about the book is that the gospel is clear and connected and applied in each kind of waiting. Now, I'll describe to you really quickly the layout of the book and how it might be used. Number one, this book could be used for you personally. As you're in seasons of waiting, this book could be a great resource to help you to process it, to think through it, how to pray, how to live in light of that. Or if you are counseling or helping another sister in Christ, this is a good book to have on hand as a resource for helping others. So I'd encourage you to consider it for that reason. The way the chapters are laid out, I don't know if you can read that really well, but you can see chapter 2 begins these topics of waiting for a bridegroom, a child, for healing, for a home, for a prodigal. And so you could select what is the particular, the season that you're in, the season of waiting that you're in, which of these chapters seems to best fit. Maybe one or two of those chapters, perhaps. And what I would encourage you to do is to start by reading the preface in chapter 1. The first chapter is just talking about waiting in general, the school of waiting, and then hit that chapter of particular need. And then, once you hit that chapter, go ahead and read those last two chapters. Chapter 7 is called Sustained While We Wait. This is a super practical chapter, really practical and very helpful for anybody in any season of waiting, for how what they ought to do, particularly as they're waiting. And then chapter 8 is called When the Waiting is Over, setting our sights on the hope of the glory of God. And for anybody in a season of waiting of any sort, that's critical. And so she includes that there. And then there's a conclusion. What are we waiting for? So hit chapter 1, hit the chapter of particular need, and then hit those last couple chapters and the conclusion. And you wouldn't need to sit down and read this whole book through. It could be just used as a resource for you personally and for helping others. And to close this review, I'll just read one quote. It comes from page 16 in my edition of the book. She says, "Waiting exposes our idols and throws a wrench into our coping mechanisms. It brings us to the end of what we can control and forces us to cry out to God. God doesn't waste our waiting. He uses it to conform us to the image of his Son." I found that quote not only very insightful, biblical, but also kind of a neat summary of what you'd expect in the book itself. Thanks.